Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening to Master English with Tim, the podcast where Tim helps you learn English in depth and detail and without ever hurrying. I'm Tim, native speaker English teacher from the United States, English teacher since 2005, world traveler, polyglot, and summarizer of large amounts of information about the English language. In this week's episode, I am going to tell you about every single type of verb that we have in English. Some of them I am sure you have heard of, for example, regular and irregular verbs or modal verbs, but some of them are less frequently talked about. For example, can you tell me what stative verbs are, or the difference between transitive and intransitive verbs? Even if you know all of the verb types that I'm going to talk about today, it's still not a bad idea to review every one of them. There are 11 of them in total, and I have separated them into chapters so you can easily choose which ones you want to learn about. Now, often, but not always, verb types occur in pairs. For example, action verbs versus stative verbs, or modal auxiliary versus non-modal auxiliary. So let's start with our first pair of verb types, action verbs and stative verbs. I decided to put action verbs first because they are what most people think of when they think about verbs, which is words for talking about actions. Here are some examples of action verbs: go, try, live, take, eat, run, lose, fall, grow, shrink, burn, leave, arrive, work, and so on. Also, we have some action verbs that name things that seem a little bit less like actions, but still are action verbs anyway. For example, stand, sit, relax, and sleep are all action verbs. We can use action verbs in every verb tense in English, including the continuous tenses. Okay, that's all for action verbs. The other verb in this pair is stative verbs. Instead of talking about actions, stative verbs talk about things like mental work, sensations, and permanent characteristics of things. For example, measurements. Let's do a few examples of each of these categories so you can get a feel for them. First, mental work. 3 examples. 1. Like. Most people like pizza. 2. Believe. She believes that the earth is flat. Third and last. Think. I think that we need to leave soon. So, some other common stative verbs about mental work are imagine, guess, understand, know, wish, recall, and remember. So next we have sensations in the body. 4 examples. 1. See. We can see the whole city when we look out our hotel window. 2. Hear. Do you hear the birds singing outside? 3. Smell. I smell smoke. Do you smell it too? 4th and last. Tom felt sick, so he drove home from work. Finally, we have qualities of things, usually long-lasting qualities. 7 examples. 1. Look. The car looks good in photos, but don't buy it yet. 2. Sound. You sound like you have a cold. Are you sick? 3. Smell. It smells like something died here. When did you last clean out the fridge? 4. Taste. Often the foods that taste the best are very unhealthy, but not always. 5. Stand. The Eiffel Tower in Paris stands 330 meters tall. 6. Weigh. I weigh 62 kilograms. 7th and last. Measure. At its widest point, the Amazon River measures up to 48 kilometers wide. So, some other stative verbs about long-lasting qualities of things are average, lack, resemble, feature, and contain. So having heard all these examples, you might think, well, who cares? You might think, okay, those things aren't exactly actions, but why does it matter? Well, the answer is that it is incorrect to use these stative verbs in the continuous verb tenses. If you do, it just sounds kind of strange. You also might not care about that, but if you're planning on taking IELTS or TOEFL or some test like that, then you want to avoid using stative verbs with continuous tenses so you get a higher score on the grammar part. There is one more thing that you need to know about stative verbs before we move on to the next category. So sometimes a verb can be a stative verb or an action verb depending on the situation, and there will be a difference in meaning. For example, let's take the word smell. The stative verb smell means to have a particular smell. For example, my clothes smell like smoke after last night's barbecue. So in this case, smell is about a long-term characteristic of something. On the other hand, we have the action verb smell, which means to breathe in through your nose with the goal of understanding how something smells. Here's an example sentence. What are they doing? They're smelling the flowers. So you can hear that in that case, that was an action verb, and it was used in a continuous tense. And as you can see generally, action verbs and stative verbs are a pretty big, complex topic, and I will probably make a whole episode about them in the future. But for now, that's everything about action verbs and stative verbs. So, now we can move on to our next pair of verb types, regular and irregular verbs. Well, when people think of regular versus irregular verbs, they almost always automatically think of the past tense. But verbs can be regular or irregular in the present tense too. So first let's talk about what it means when a verb is regular in the present tense. Verbs that are regular in the present tense use the ending s or es after he, she, and it. Let's remember that he also means boy, man, son, brother, husband, John, Douglas, Bob, and so on, and she also means girl, woman, daughter, wife, Jane, Olga, and so on. So with subjects that mean he or she, we need to use the s or es ending. So it's not just he and she, it's also people that mean he or she. So people make 3 mistakes with the s or es ending. First, they don't use it when they need to. Second, they do use it when they shouldn't. And third, they pronounce it wrong. They pronounce it wrong most often when a verb ends with the sounds s, z, ch, sh, or j. So again, that's s, z, ch, sh, and j. When a regular verb ends with one of those sounds, the final es ending is not pronounced s, and it's not pronounced z. It's instead pronounced is. That's a complete new syllable. It's not an extra sound, it's 2 new extra sounds, I and z. So together, is. 5 examples. 1. Pass, passes. He always passes his exams. Again, that's not pass, it's passes. 2. Lose, loses. She loses her keys all the time. Not lose, loses, it's loses. 3. Watch, watches. James watches a lot of cowboy movies. 4. Wash, washes. Elaine washes her car once a month. 5th and last, judge, judges. He judges people unfairly sometimes. Okay, so now we are ready for irregular verbs. If a verb is irregular in the present tense, it means it doesn't follow that pattern of using the s or es ending. We have 4 verbs that are irregular in the present tense, plus another small but important group that is irregular. Let's start with those 4 verbs, though. The most used verb in English, and the one that is most irregular, is of course be. Be is super irregular because not only does it break the pattern of using the s ending, but in fact all of its forms look and sound completely different from the base form of the verb. Am, is, and are, these forms sound nothing like be. If you want to learn more about the verb be and its 5 different meanings or uses, then you can listen to episode 56, which is only about the verb be. So the second verb that is irregular in the present is have. Have is irregular because the form we use with he, she, and it does not just add an s. Instead, we lose the letters v and e and put an s there. So not haves, that would be regular, haves, which we don't say. Instead, we say he has, she has, it has. The third verb that's irregular in the present tense is do. Do looks like it is regular because it uses the es ending, but there is a difference here. The vowel sound in do is oo, but in the form that we use with he, she, and it, that oo vowel sound changes to an like in the word sun, butter, or money. So we don't say do's, we say does. I'm sure you've noticed that. All right, we have one last verb that is irregular in the present tense. That verb is say. It also uses the S ending with he, she, and it, so it looks regular on paper, but again, we pronounce that form with the S differently. The vowel sound changes from the A, like in say, to the E, like in get or left. So we don't say he, she, or it says. Instead, the correct pronunciation is says. Now, I said earlier that we have 4 verbs that are irregular in the present tense, plus another small but important group of verbs that's also irregular in the present. So, there are 11 more verbs that don't use that S ending. They are can, could, may, might, needn't, shall, should, and will and would. These verbs do not use that S ending at all. These verbs that I just named are all called modal verbs, and I will talk about them a bit later in this episode. Okay, now we can talk about regular and irregular verbs in the past tense. Regular verbs, of course, use the D or ED ending in the past. That ending is pronounced in 3 different ways, depending on the last sound of the verb. If a verb ends in an unvoiced sound like k, f, p, or s, then the D or ED ending is pronounced t. For example, I liked the movie, not I liked the movie. If a verb ends in a voiced sound like g, v, b, or z, then the D ending is pronounced d. For example, I loved the movie. Students make 3 types of mistakes with this D or ED ending. Sometimes they use the ending when they shouldn't. For example, when they think a verb is regular, when in reality it's irregular, and they put the D ending on there when it should not be. Sometimes they forget to use the ending completely. Sometimes it's just difficult for them to pronounce the ending. That usually happens when the end of a verb already has another consonant or even 2 or more consonants there. For example, change, the verb change, in the past becomes changed. So the last sounds in that are n, d, j, and then again duh. N, d, j, duh. That's not easy to say, njt. It's very easy for me to say it, but for a lot of my students, it's not. So this happens a lot with people who speak East Asian languages, but also sometimes even with, say, German or Russian or Spanish speakers. There is one more problem that people can have with this D or ED ending. They pronounce it wrong. So far, I've told you only 2 pronunciations for the D ending, but there is a third one. When a regular verb ends in t or d, then the d ending or d ending is pronounced not d or t, but id. Again, that's 2 sounds, not 1. It's I, d, id. It's a complete new syllable at the end of a word. 3 examples. 1, wait, waited. He waited for the bus. 2, expect, expected. She expected a stronger reaction. 3rd and last, need, needed. He needed our help. All right, that's the regular past tense verbs. We also have, of course, the very famous irregular past tense verbs. A verb is irregular in the past if it doesn't follow that usual D or ED pattern. We have, of course, the irregulars that everyone thinks of: see and saw, take and took, leave and left, and also some that don't change form at all, like put and put, or set and set. Also, be is irregular in the past, with forms of was and were, and so is can, with the past form of could. And will is irregular in the past. Its past form is would. Yes, that's right, the future verb will has a past tense form. Okay, let's now move away from regular and irregular verbs completely and talk about some other categories. So the next category is auxiliary verbs. I have talked a lot about auxiliary verbs in past episodes, from episode 52 to episode 59, in fact, if you want a detailed review of all of them. Auxiliary verbs have 7 different functions. One of those functions is that some verb tenses always use an auxiliary verb. For example, the past continuous and the present continuous always include a form of be. The past perfect and present perfect always include a form of have. The future continuous uses will and be. The future perfect uses will and have. So most verb tenses, although not necessarily the most used ones, always include an auxiliary verb. One other really important function of auxiliary verbs is that we use them to make negative statements and yes-no questions. Okay, now let's listen to 4 negative statements, and remember that each one starts with an auxiliary verb. 1. I'm not ready to make a decision. 2. You shouldn't complain so much. 3. We haven't seen any good movies lately. 4th and last. Tom doesn't leave the house very often. Okay, now for yes-no questions. Yes-no questions are questions where the answer is yes or no. 5 examples. Notice that in each example, the question starts with an auxiliary verb. 1. Have you been to Canada before? 2. Is everyone ready to go? 3. Do they like opera music? 4. Can you drive a car? 5th and last. Should we bring a gift? So now we can combine yes-no questions with tag questions. If you want to learn about tag questions in detail, then listen to episode 90. So what is a tag? Basically, a tag question is a very short yes-no question that we can attach to the end of an ordinary yes-no question. For example, isn't he or is he? Or can't we or can we? These are tag questions. Tag questions always contain an auxiliary. If the first main question is positive, then the tag is negative. We use tags to check or confirm that what we think is true. 3 examples with a positive question and then a negative tag. 1. You are coming, aren't you? 2. They can speak English, can't they? 3rd and last. He does know how to ride a bike, doesn't he? Now, on the other hand, if the main question, the first question, is negative, then the tag question, the one that you use to check the information, is positive. So, main question negative, tag question positive. 3 examples. 1. She isn't interested, is she? 2. He can't speak English, can he? 3rd and last. Mila doesn't want to come with us, does she? Okay, another function of auxiliaries is for making short, polite answers to yes-no questions. When someone asks you a yes-no question, you can answer with yes or no and then repeat the auxiliary that was in the question. 3 examples. 1. Do you know Jason? Possible answers, short answers, yes I do, or no I don't. So again, the auxiliary verb in the question was do. Do you know Jason? Yes I do, or no I don't. 2. Is the report ready? Yes it is, or no it isn't. 3. Can they speak English? Yes, they can, or no, they can't. Now, the next function of auxiliary verbs, I think this is the 5th of 7, if I've been counting correctly, is for making WH questions. WH questions are questions that start with words like what, where, when, why, and also how, and combinations of how plus an adjective. For example, how much, how many, how far, how fast, how well, and so on. 8 examples. Note that in each example, we have first a question word and then an auxiliary. 1. Why are you so sleepy today? 2. What do you want to do this weekend? 3. Where can I find a good Thai restaurant? 4. Where have you been? I've been looking for you for hours. 5. Who do you want to invite to the party? 6. When did they get home from Florida? 7. How much money should I spend on my first house? 8th and last. How far is the airport from your house? So the 6th function or use of auxiliaries is to emphasize an important fact that a listener isn't paying enough attention to, or to correct a listener's mistaken idea about something. 2 examples in context. Note that in both cases, the auxiliary verb gets strong stress. 1. Situation is, 2 friends are talking about flying to New York City together. One of them has never been to a big city, and she's worried about using public transportation. She thinks it's going to be really complicated. So her friend says to her, you know, we can just take a taxi. Second situation. A father tells his son that he can't play PlayStation because he didn't do his homework. This is not true, though, so the son says, but Dad, I did do my homework. Do you want me to show it to you? Okay, the 7th and final function of auxiliary verbs is that we use 2 of them to make the passive voice. Yes, you did hear that correctly. We can use 2 different verbs when making the passive voice. The first one is, of course, be. Here are 3 examples of the passive voice with the auxiliary be. 1. Corn is planted in the spring. 2. The package was delivered yesterday. Third and last. Your dinner will be ready soon. It is being prepared now. So less commonly known is the fact that we can use get to make the passive voice. Using get sounds more conversational and less formal than be. And this is also the only case in which get is an auxiliary verb. 3 examples. 1. My car got stolen last night. 2. Our house got damaged in the storm. Third and last. All of the pizza at the party got eaten very quickly. Okay, that's all 7 functions of the auxiliary verbs. Actually, there are 2 types of auxiliary verbs, non-modal and modal auxiliaries. I'm going to keep it short with the non-modal ones. The non-modal auxiliaries are simply be, do, and have. Modal verbs, on the other hand, are verbs that, instead of talking about an action like a typical verb does, they instead talk about things like probability, or permission, or necessity, or obligation, or even how often something happens. Modal verbs are also used with the base form of a verb. For example, can go and not can to go. That actually sounds really bad. Can to go. It's not can to go, it's can go. And modal verbs also never use the standard S or ES ending. Let's give some examples of modal verbs of different types of meanings. 1. Probability. The book that I ordered should arrive tomorrow. 2. Permission. Yes, you can eat during the class. 3. Necessity. You must have a passport if you want to travel. 4. Obligation. You shouldn't speak when you are visiting the library. 5. How often something happens. It can still get pretty cold at the end of March. So, we just talked about modal verbs, but we also have semi-modal verbs. And you know what? Semi-modal verbs are honestly a kind of annoying and messy category. They have some, but not all of the characteristics of modal verbs. That can mean a few different things. So, first, ought to is semi-modal because unlike the true modals, it is used with to. None of the true modals does this. Remember that you can't say can to go. Sounds terrible. Should to try. No, sounds terrible. Should try. So, ought to, though, has a modal meaning about probability or obligation, and it is an auxiliary verb. So it has all of the characteristics of a modal verb, except that you use it with to. So second, we have need to, have to, and use to. So these ones express ideas that are similar to the ones that are expressed by modals, but they also use to after them, and they are not auxiliaries. So you need to add do to make questions or negative statements. So, some examples, actually 3 of them. 1. No, I don't need to go to the store today. 2. Did you used to live in Chicago? 3. You don't have to buy me such expensive gifts. Finally, we have dare not. Dare not doesn't really express a modal-like idea, but it is used without to and like an auxiliary. We don't say I didn't dare speak, instead we say I dare not speak. Also, it doesn't even have a past tense form with a negative. So, yeah, it has a few characteristics of modals, but it's not quite a modal. So it's a semi-modal. And fortunately, that's all for the semi-modals. We have another pair now of categories of verbs. This pair is transitive and intransitive verbs, and in fact, it's the last pair. To understand what a transitive verb is, we need to quickly review what an object is. An object is a person, place, or thing that receives an action. If you want to find an object in a sentence, then first find the verb and ask who or what. For example, if the sentence is, I watch movies, then ask, what do I watch? The answer, movies. So, I watch movies. What do I watch? Movies. So, movies is the object. Or if the sentence is, Tim publishes an episode every Monday, then we can ask, what does Tim publish? The answer, of course, is episode. So episode is the object there. And a transitive verb, again, is a verb that is used with an object. Now let me give you some more example phrases with a transitive verb and then an object. So here we go. Eat a sandwich. Watch a movie. Drive a car. Read the news. Speak English. Fix a motorcycle. Take a shower. These are all examples of phrases with transitive verbs in them. If you want to learn more about objects, listen to episode 94. Now, sometimes the person who does the action also receives that same action. For instance, someone can say, I see myself in the mirror. So let's ask that same question that we had before. I see myself in the mirror. Who do I see? I see myself. So myself is the object here. So clearly the person who did the action also received it. We have a special name for verbs when the person who does the action also receives them. We call these verbs reflexive verbs, and they are a type of transitive verb. Here are 3 sentences, each one with a reflexive verb. 1. She hurt herself riding a horse. 2. He knows himself well. 3rd and last. She accidentally cut herself. Okay, I said that transitive verbs are ones that use an object or a person or thing that receives the action. But we also have intransitive verbs, verbs which do not have an object. For example, if we say, I run in the mornings, and then ask, who do I run? Well, the answer is, nobody. You don't run someone, you just run. The sun doesn't rise someone in the morning, the sun just rises. In the winter, the temperature doesn't fall someone, the temperature just falls. When the food on the grill smells good, it doesn't smell someone, it just smells. So these are all examples of intransitive verbs. Some more examples of intransitive verbs are go, talk, cry, smile, fall, and disappear. One last detail before we finish. Some verbs can be transitive or intransitive. For instance, walk. In the following sentence, walk is intransitive. It has no object. 1. I love to walk in the rain. So if we ask the question, what do you walk or who do you walk? Well, you can't answer the question. The person just walks. And in the next sentence, though, walk is transitive. 1. Every morning and every evening, I walk my dog. So what do you walk or who do you walk? You walk your dog. So in that case, walk has an object, and therefore it is transitive. And that, everyone, is every type of verb that we have in English. I hope that this episode is helpful for you. Thanks for listening, everyone, and see you all next Monday.